System seems, well, I'm speaking too soon. It seemed faster, at least for that second. Here we go. Well, I'm speaking too soon. It seemed faster. Gabriella. Hey, Lon.
Hey Jeff.
Good morning.
Good morning. Gabriella, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling a lot better. I was down for the count this past week, but I think I will be up to leave the house tomorrow. I
Huh?
have another, yeah, so I had the flu.
Do you have a lot that you have to do this week?
I'm gonna be focusing this on this writing this week.
That's good. Do you have lately, do you have a lot of self-taping?
I actually did have I had an in-person audition yesterday that I didn't get to go to, so I had to put myself on tape.
Oh, wow.
Um, that was interesting. Gotta do what you gotta do.
No, I mean, some people can tough it out, but that's tough. And plus, actors aren't used to the in-person anymore.
I love in person. Well, um, I feel like really fortunate that I've been to in person a few times recently, and I love it. It's fast. It's faster. You get to just really meet the moment, and it's better for me because you get the direction in the room, the energy. You can
Of
just there's
course, I
so
mean,
much, yeah.
they've made everybody by default a filmmaker.
Right. Oh my gosh. It's actually horrible for me because you just do so many more takes and you have to force yourself to not do as many, and um
Right.
you get in your head and then you just start and then you can't pick between them because they're so similar.
I guess you can invite your friend over to direct. Ben, good morning. We're talking about self-taping versus in person.
Ah, yes,
But I
yes.
have an actor friend who's helping me with an archival project I've gone through. I've emptied about 50 boxes and I've found everything since from the actual invitations from all of my friends in seventh grade on the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah circuit to my waterbed receipt from college junior year to grades and high school papers and writers boot camp ads and promotional pieces. It's been fascinating. But what's amazing is how great she is at photographing without shadow because she knows where the light needs to be. And you wouldn't expect that from most actors back in the day. You know, of course, people with experience and on set a lot. So anyway, happy New Year, everybody. I expect one or two more people, although Paul's coming late. And Lon, you get to be the mascot superstar
I don't mind
based
one bit.
based on your continuity and your productivity. But are you getting more than 10 hours in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I work from I don't know 6 to 2 and write from 2 to 6. You know,
Yeah, that's
and
great.
just kind of hang out with the family after that. So yeah, definitely.
Well, it shows. So it's great. Um,
Thank you.
and, people, we as a company have always taught to the top of the curve while still making sure during office hours that people who aren't getting the vocabulary early enough or, get in their heads and that sort of thing, um, have some help. But, you know, the challenge of the entertainment business is that while apparently not everybody who succeeds was necessarily academically excellent, but there's a kind of persistence and in some cases a narcissism, but and a need pathologically. But there is, you know, evidence of people with vision and people with passion who are able to get past a lot of the inherent obstacles. So you seem to have that, it's not just the cliche of a military background and that discipline, but just the ability to schedule and focus, and not just this group. There were two or three really good reasons why once they started, they couldn't continue. And that happens occasionally. When you have 12 to 15 people, you expect one or two people to trail off. But for the October and the December rosters, it's unbelievable to me how many challenges there have been. And it may just be a reflection of the times we're going through. Because, regardless of your political affiliation, we just did what as a country? So, there's a tendency to have a preponderance of progressive, artists go through, and be attracted to the entertainment industry. But regardless of politics, it's a crazy time. And with AI looming, who knows where that's going. So anyway, welcome to the new year. Welcome to week 4. My feeling is that dependent on the 4 or 5 people and their schedule, that we can recalibrate for the last 2 meetings to Tuesdays or Wednesday mornings. And it's really up to you. So, Lon, you tend to be generally available.
I am. I think the only time I wouldn't be available is Wednesdays at 1:00 Eastern time. So that's 10:00 your time. So okay. Wednesday is the only day I wouldn't be able to sit.
So what I'm leaning toward is sending a note this afternoon that we'll continue with week 5 and week 8 on Tuesdays. And then I'll reset the schedule. I'll just let Erica know. Hi, Erica.
Hi.
So are you available if we move week 5 to Tuesday and week 8 to Tuesday morning? Is that okay with you? Just to reset the weeks. And then I'll send a note today also about the first draft deadline. The cool thing is, because this is only week 4, which is only a few weeks. Of course, we had the extra week by because of the holiday. We're only a few days. It's only like 10 days different than it would normally be. But still, because we are only in week 4, which means technically all anybody's been expected to do is get in 30 hours. And while Lon may be at the top of the curve as far as the application of a few extra hours to the 363, because, maybe put on the spot, people rise to that challenge and then want to do better. Not that you're not already motivated, Lon, but, and there isn't pressure for anybody, even though I ask for volunteers. You don't have to feel like it's a problem that you didn't feel ready, because basic training isn't designed for discussion amongst the group about material. In the 18 months you go through pro membership, when you do, it's every other week. There's a half-hour review of a checkpoint. There's a second workbook for pro membership with 10 to 15 checkpoints, key exercises, including the 363 and some other things you've been exposed to. And then 3 to 5 people share work. And because every exercise has a specific, but not formulaic, but specific evaluation method, everybody shares that language of collaboration, and it avoids the problems with other workshops where a suggestible person is also imposed upon by somebody who's monopolizing or likes the sound of their own voice. And so we're still empowering authority. And even in basic training, as somebody like Paul can, attest, although he's going to be late today. First, we're your sounding board, then the tools are your sounding board, then you become an authority of your own work by using the tools or having a second nature approach and understanding the nuances of those. And sometimes, like watching a movie for the second or third time, as you orbit through those exercises and tools, you see different levels. Because the 363 is at the structural level, but at the same time, it covers a lot more than structure because it illustrates character arc and character development. And you can allude to scene work and scene ideas, even though it's not a scene outline, it will contain pivotal scenes. You start to see all of those levels. So you still have a month and a few days to hand in a draft. Then you might be a bit more behind depending on what the caliber of your outline is. If you have 70 to 80 scenes and if you're still writing a feature, great. You still have plenty of time to get 60, 70 pages in, and you can use the last 2 weeks to do additional pages or to put a pin in the story and zoom out for rewriting understanding, even if you're not doing the rewriting exercises. And I'll reiterate how the schedule works. And Erica, if you're doing hour long, you don't need 4 weeks to write the pages. There might be other obstacles and little landmines along the way that make you question the stories, the storylines, the ensemble, the nature of the overlapping of storylines, and those kinds of things, and what the pilot is really accomplishing. Even with somebody who's joining the January roster, I went into that riff about The Mandalorian. First of all, it's an old school kind of show, not to say, because it's mostly a main character with a dynamic and they're interacting with different characters. So pretty much The Mandalorian is in the A story of most of those quote storylines, but there aren't really multiple storylines. You pretty much have an A story with supporting characters and characters pertinent to that particular adventure or investigation, like a Columbo. But most current television is multiple storyline. But if I were writing the pilot without having a put deal, let's say that I came up with a new idea to extend the franchise of Star Wars, and I wasn't Jon Favreau or Tony Gilroy, then maybe I would introduce Grogu at page 12 or 15 or 30 rather than the very end, because you don't accomplish proof of concept by just making an episode as a spec pilot introductory, although it's allowed to contain introductions because it is technically the first episode. But remember, these characters might know each other for many years that you're introducing us to. So that's just an aside, that there are just like there are 10 to 15 issues on a prose style sheet, just like there are 15 parts of a premise line for a feature, there are 15 decisions you make about your TV series and how it's going to work. But there's no reason at this point, even with a small and modest roster, and sometimes more comes up for everybody's benefit in a larger roster because the work fills the available time. There are more questions asked and answered. But there's no reason everybody can't complete a really great set of pages by that deadline, whenever it is. If today's the 6th, it would be probably February, first week in February, and I'll reiterate that in an email this afternoon. So our meetings will be next Tuesday and then 3 weeks from Tuesday, I believe. And one thing I want to emphasize this week, tonight, tomorrow, by Thursday morning, the latest, send me one page from the middle of your potential script, even if it's an old script. And if somebody were writing prose, it would be a double-spaced one page of prose. So it's just one page, because that's the main focus of next week's meeting. You could argue that if the first meeting was about basic training and logistics and screenwriting fallacies and vocabulary and an introduction to the schedule and the process, then weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5 are concept, structure, character development, and scene work. What we'll do mostly today is we'll review the 20 things that we've been exposed to already in the prior 3 weeks, and you'll see how much ground we've covered and how much material is inherently, within this process. And then secondly, we can look at some character development through the 363 that Lon's revised and look at those levels. And for anybody writing TV, you're applying the principles of the 363 by analogy, because in TV, you don't generally have sequences, so you don't have that challenge of creating slices of a more profound adventure. You could argue that the adventure is more important, that stage of life and what the adventure represents, a character being on the verge of, and that process and change and catalytic process, than the character identification that we might have in a TV series where you're tuning in episode after episode. Although not every genre has warm people inhabiting a story in TV. So character development is important, but it's character development as pertinent to the certain kind of experience that you're giving the audience. And that experience is different in TV, although still a season of TV is similar to the adventure in a feature, if you choose an A story or a B story, and you can look at a character from that perspective. So I want everybody to submit in PDF form, formatted in Final Draft or whatever screenwriting format program you're using. Send me that one page, just call it in caps, 1 space page space Benjamin Novin, or your name, in caps. And that way they'll line up when I copy them to my desktop, they'll all line up together. It's okay that they'll be alphabetical by first name, and it'll be easy for me to attach those in an email to everybody before next meeting. And we'll be more agnostic about how we evaluate them. The writers whose scenes are more advanced, more interesting, or just more like clarified, we'll address content, but we're not evaluating it for content. Facetiously and irreverently, I may give you a compliment, and it does not repel me. And that's actually a compliment, because what I'm doing initially is I'm just looking for what we call hitches of all kinds. Something on any middle page. And we just don't want to use page 1, because page 1 works differently than other pages. Because on page 1, and I'll talk about this next week, we don't usually introduce dialogue until 3/4 down the page, because we're bringing an audience into an arena, into a place. And there is more of a metaphor being created, not that you're overtly visual, but there is an opportunity for more of a visual, establishing a visual style and context. And that's not a rule. That's generally how screenplays work, especially when you imagine that the filmmaker is taking a reader or an audience into a space, into a mindset. So that's why we just want something in the middle of the script. And you can just take 10, 15 minutes to write that down the page, put down a slug line, a setup line, and on the nose dialogue. But what we'll look for is the parts of the page and the different ways that a script page and entire script can hitch. And there tend to be more hitches in the first 15, 20 pages of a script than later on as a writer has visualized the story. But a script and a page can hitch for a concept, for structure, for character development, for scene work, and then spacing, typos, grammatical problems, unnecessary continueds and cut tos. And what we're going for is a more seamless style. And if you haven't read 100 scripts and thought about them and broken them down and studied them, these things will not be apparent or obvious to you. But when you've read thousands of scripts as well as created the top screenwriting school in Hollywood, you see these things. It's sort of like, Lon, do you remember Karnak the magician, Johnny Carson's character on The Tonight Show?
I do. Carney, yep.
He would have a turban, but he would hold the envelope to his temple and he would guess the punchline of a joke. And then he would open it up and then give the joke, give the setup line. Well, what you can almost weigh a screenplay in your hands and look at a couple of pages and understand how it's doing, what it's accomplishing. And we're not trying to do this to be tricky. We're doing it to help writers become more seamless and self-aware about their craft issues. Hitches barely scratch the surface of craft meaning aspects of scene work. So we start the material next week with the 5 aspects of scene work and a couple of very important concepts and tools. And that the work that we do next week alludes to and helps foreshadow your craft rewrite in week 9. So
I have a question. I'm sorry.
yeah, go for it. Perfect timing.
Thank you. I was wondering, so you said slugline, so would you like the page to be at the beginning of a scene?
It's a good idea for now. It doesn't have to be an entire scene, although many scenes are only one page, but it's only one page of the scene. And yes, it is a good idea to start it at the top of the page, as opposed to it being a continuation of something else. And it's not because we're spoon feeding everybody or trying to be overly, simple, but it helps to say, okay, how does a writer go about setting up a scene? But we're not looking, and if you have to send 2 pages because you can't somehow cut it off, we're just going to ignore. If I tend to print them all, and then if it's longer than a page, I just throw out the subsequent pages because we're only evaluating one page. This isn't a scene study meeting. It's different. But, there is an old adage, and those of you who are actors, you get a lot out of this. Experienced actors can read the phone book and you might understand the subtext of the scene. Meaning what they're saying isn't always as important as the performance of the line. And one of the craft potential rewrites, and it's helpful to talk about this because we have the time today. There are 4 categories of craft rewriting. 1 is scene conduct. What's the relationship within the scene and between the characters from one slug line to the next slug line over the duration of the scene? How does that material unfold and how is it delivered? Because you don't always have to have a two shot, and characters don't have to agree with each other. So what are the options for delivery and unfolding of information? Secondly, you have general scene direction or action rewrites and craft issues. Is scene direction too dense? Do you need to move down the page? Is the language too passive? Is it missing articles and prepositions because it's fragmented too much? Are the paragraphs, do they need to be separated? Are writers using too much camera language or being overly shot driven as opposed to broad stroke? Third, and there are 50 total craft rewrites that I've identified. Third is general dialogue issues. This has to do with performance. Can there be more misbehavior in the dialogue? It's scene direction too. Is dialogue overly linear as opposed to agenda driven or emotional? So if I say to Ben, you were supposed to bring in the ice from the car for the party. Ben doesn't have to say, get your own ice or use that word. He can say, you see, I told you, you don't trust me. It's a much different kind of characterization and dialogue process than responding directly to a question or having so many question marks, not being agenda based, not being misbehavior based, not have character separation. And then fourth is really about character. And those are usually the higher level and initial priorities for craft rewriting. Character voice through misbehavior, through vocabulary, through agenda, through emotion, their style of speech. And in the general dialogue issues, you can often look at the page and see that dialogue is either each character is speaking in a line and there's like call, response, and that's too much, or it's overly bantery, or too literal, or on the nose, or that characters have long speeches. And it's one thing in Good Will Hunting to have a speech in the courtroom or in the therapy meeting or at the Harvard bar or at the job interview. But those are important scenes, and those are set pieces, and those are part of the kind of tour de force of the conceit of that project. So on purpose, you can have a long speech, but generally, if a dialogue is literally 3 lines, not even 3 sentences, but 3 lines down the page, it's long. It's not wrong, just like a scene longer than 2 pages isn't wrong. It's just where and when is it happening, and what's going on, and how is it unfolding, and is it dramatic, and is it entertaining, and are there set pieces? So we cover rewriting here in a significant way, and especially imparting the context of what a writer will have to eventually go through. And we save writers time and money by focusing on rewriting. But it's still a light touch process during basic training. It's a 2-week process with an opportunity. If you're feeling behind, which is normal, and if you're overly focused on contiguous pages versus getting the lesson from the work on the rite of passage that you're going through, then you will be maybe, missing some of that material, because you won't be as opportunistic and present to integrating it. So, and Lon, if you focus too much on the 363 the next 3-4 weeks, you could end up falling behind as much as we might assume you're in a good place right now. Because an hour here or there is worthwhile, but after the notes today, the goal isn't, you could spend an hour, but I haven't looked at, I've glanced at it. I've looked at a couple of long sequences, but there might be some notes that if you take them to heart too seriously, too severely, then that wouldn't be ideal for your next 4 weeks. But the fact that you have it, the fact that, you're understanding your story better is improving the pages of that first draft, even though in a way there's no such thing as a great first draft. It's just, did you do enough work so that you're ready to rewrite? Because first draft is still barely the end of the beginning. So we have a few minutes. Well, I'll just say this then. We'll meet next Tuesday. I'll reiterate those 2 dates. Week 8 is about rewriting and reflecting on the process, and about assigning 2 exercises that take a maximum of 2 hours. And then you hand in whatever you have by the first draft deadline. That makes you eligible for your conference, regardless of rewriting. And then if you do hand in something by the final deadline, we'll evaluate that. But if you don't hand anything else in, meeting the first draft deadline is crucial because it preserves your conference, whatever it is, even if it's just a 363 and an outline or a set of 20 pages. So are there any questions about the last few weeks of work that you've done, and anything that you want to address? Erica, I wasn't pushing you too hard to hand in a section of an outline, but of all people, we know that your history is that when you start to write, productivity isn't the problem. So I thought, in a small group, why not?
I finally did send you something, but not until we started class.
Okay, if we have time, you might be able to just read 2 or 3 of them.
That's terrifying, but okay.
All right. Well, just, Lon, what's the main question I ask about a scene statement when I look at it, or when I'm encouraging writers about their process or the stages of that outline?
The main question. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, Jeff. I'm not going to sit here and hem and haw.
That's fine.
So just because I have no idea.
So not main, but in addition to the rhythm of sort of beginning, middle, and end, although it's more like intro and outro and middle, is the second half of the sentence explicit? Like so if I say, JG and the group talk about the differences in Chicago pizza, I just heard that somebody has a restaurant with 8 pizza ovens and to make different kinds of Chicago pizza. Again, this is silly, but it's fun. I like tavern style pizza, which is thin. It's kind of like New York. And in LA, Mulberry Street is my favorite pizza. They actually have the New York Post on the counter. It's that New York style, slightly oily, but thin pizza with enough cheese and enough tomato sauce. So if there's a scene statement and it just says, JG talks on Zoom about the differences between Chicago pizza and the fallacies of such. So that doesn't tell you where we all get. That doesn't have what happens in the scene. That's only setup. So the main question is, have I gotten beyond setup, not in all the details of a scene, because if you know the details, you can just write it down the page. Just write a scene. But the reason we want a scene outline is so that we have a chance to test that idea before we write it, because it's harder to fix things in the mix. I mean, when writers have talent and experience, they know the work ahead of them, so they might jump to mini script and write a half a page or write a scene and not worry about its value or the nature of its expression or the level of entertainment yet. There's something that they can visualize. They hang on to moments, they hang on to interactions, they understand how they're going to get out of the scene while they're getting into the scene. So my main concern with evaluating scene statements isn't necessarily whether intellectually they're working, although that is a part of it and part of the light touch of a screenwriter and any strong writer who's crisp on the page. and seamless will have to do with that understanding of how it connects to the other parts of the story and in the fabric and the structure and the proportion of the overall adventure. Huh, what a sweetheart. But it's how clearly does it unfold, and are we getting to the nature of the character interaction sooner than later? Because you can think you have it planned, and then you look at that scene statement, whether you throw it into the final draft file and type over it, or have some other version of the way you work, then suddenly you're staring at a blank page again. What did I mean? What was supposed to happen? What are the characters doing? So if you don't have those dynamics established, if you don't understand the mood and the atmosphere or the segue into the scene, and then how it's going to unfold, then you haven't written an explicit statement. But as soon as in that 3-line scene statement, which is going to cover 1 to 3 pages of script, as soon as you do have those things, as long as you don't start writing moments, because that's scene work, then it's in a good place. But as soon as it becomes a paragraph with all the details, you might as well have just written the scene and those details and moments down the page, as opposed to a paragraph. And of course, a single sentence is technically can be a paragraph. And these nuances are important because they do apply. But we're not looking for 6, 7 lines down the page, because now you're being inefficient with your time. And you can justify it because you felt you needed it, or you did it and it didn't take long and it wasn't painful. But the physical aspect of screenwriting, and perhaps AI is resolving that drudgery, I don't really know yet. I haven't done the deep dive yet. And I would forewarn you against using ChatGPT right now to create scripts. It's a problem. It's not exactly plagiarism, but it's a form of it. It's related to it. And you can tell the difference. We still need the cleverness of every individual here, and that passion. And I'm not saying that the robots won't find it, but it's not much drudgery if it's a single sentence, and then you do mini script down the page. Do you understand what I'm saying, Erica, about the problem with it becoming a paragraph? And then he said, thick pizza.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you want the argument and the interaction, but as soon as you start getting into describing the scene, well, you might as well have written the page. That's why. Because a scene outline of 40 pages, while some old school producers still like treatments, I hate them because they're not well structured, and it's a waste of time when something like a 363, which can take a long time to write the different drafts of it, but it's there on a single page. And if a writer can write scene work, then you don't worry about a whole treatment, because that adds like months to the project. And even in film schools around the country, they still have some writers, or at least they used to, write treatments in an entire semester. Fuck treatments. So, because. All right, so any other comments or questions? Erica, was there anything in case I cut you off? All right, so let's just look back at the last 3+ weeks. I exposed everybody to this idea of 6 months full development, meaning there are 6 benchmarks of 40 hours each in the development of a feature. A book will take longer, and a pilot can be knocked down to probably, half that time, 3 to 4 months. But don't underestimate that the distinctions between television and features do require, if you're doing current television, multiple storylines, and then a lot more to figure out. And those 6 benchmarks are toolkit and outline, 1, 2, mini script if you use it, and first draft completion, 3, 4, and 5, component level rewriting, and 6, craft rewriting, which can come to 10 drafts. If you count the mini script as 1, the first draft as 2, the 3 component rewrites as now 5, and then 4 or 5 craft rewrites in that month. It's not exactly a month, because if you have ever had to meet payroll, technically a month is 4.3 weeks, because otherwise 4 times 12 is only 48 weeks. And there are 52 weeks in the year. I still have triggers because at some point I had like 15 staff back in the day. Along with that is creative calendar, that there are 168 hours in the week, 24 hours a day times 7. After 50 hours of day job, 50 hours of sleep, to get 10 hours a week represents 15% of your non-working waking life. So if you don't make it a priority, it will suffer. And for most writers who really do have that bug, there's nothing worse than time passing without having written. And then once you're productive, there are other issues more important than productivity, like cleverness, distinction, concept, understanding industry, structure, and accepted guidelines, etc. So the 2 levels of rewriting are contained in that overall 6-month process, working 10 hours a week. If you work 20 hours a week, you'll lack the gestation, but now you can get 10 drafts done in 3 months. And so you might need a little more time in between. And most writers, even who are writing full time technically, aren't writing more than 25 hours in a week, because there are other things they're doing: running their business, meeting with people, finding assignments, looking for work, fulfilling different stages of completion of other projects, working on multiple projects. It's challenging. Then there are 4 levels of script development and evaluation. The same levels exist for evaluating and collaborating, in addition to writing and developing a project. And they work top down, from concept to structure to character development to scene work. And each of those levels have a specific exercise that I've created to represent that level: premise line and the 5 story components at the conceptual level, the 363 at the structural level, although it touches on more and it integrates more than just structure. TV writers don't need a 363 because the scripts are shorter, and with multiple storylines, they're not as challenging to structure. And you don't have sequences because events happen in scenes. But at least the feature and book writers have a 363, so they don't always have to revise their outline later. But a TV writer, at the character development level, where the scene outline for all these formats resides as the main exercise, you do need, as a TV writer, to have a story separated scene outline and to revise that, because you don't have a 363 to wave around. And the reason we put the scene outline at the character development level is because those encounters in a particular place over a short period of time, which marks, the beginning of a new scene or the end of a scene and the beginning of a new one, are these sort of ratchets on the roller coaster. And how you develop character is put them in a scene together and show how they're now behaving or misbehaving or resisting or showing enhanced behavior and agreement. And then at the scene work level, which is the further expression of those scene ideas in moments down the page, we're allowed to use words across the page, but we're mostly moving down the page in interactions and moments. We have mini script and windows and different forms of windows, including the highest form, set pieces. And set pieces, that term is my version of the phrase. So I made it one word rather than set space piece. In the industry, a set piece is a part of the set or a production number. But at Writers Boot Camp, it means a line or window or moment of scene direction or dialogue that contains the genetic material of the conceit. And a project can have more than one conceit, but it usually has at least a story conceit. And then if you're lucky, a character conceit or so. Just because you define your character in a single sentence very expressly doesn't mean that that makes them a unique character. So you have another level, the bar's at a higher level, another level of evaluation where you have to say, is this somebody we've never quite seen before? And then if it is, then you have a character conceit, Napoleon Dynamite or Rocky Balboa or the Incredible Hulk or Spider-Man. So, and they can be human like Annie Hall, or Rocky's human, or maybe Aaron Brockovich, you can argue, as a character conceit, depending on how many traits they have. And so the two kinds of conceits that we focus on primarily are story conceit, which is unique action, and character conceit, which is unique personality. And then occasionally we have cinematic conceit, which is some visual effect or cinematic effect that we haven't seen before, a unique presentation, like if 3D were unique. But writers tend not to be the creators of those ideas. And so that's why we don't place it as significantly as character conceit and story conceit. And if you're still confused by the word conceit, it just means unique. And the silver lining of the industry is that as brutal as it can be to get something made, and I'm amazed at how many things do get made by skilled, persistent people, even in an industry that is disrupted, and how well our alumni do. The silver lining is that if you have a conceit, it means it hasn't been done before to some degree, which then means it's viable. Not automatically, depending on the genre, depending on the expense and the budget and other variables. So within that whole process, and especially within structure, we have other unique Writers Bootcamp tools in terms like misbehavior, which attracts A-list talent to your characters. It's a way of illustrating character arc as opposed to just the industry's development view of, oh, what's your character's arc? We see it through those moments of misbehavior. Every character can misbehave, but when we talk about misbehavior, generally we mean the building block misbehavior of the story, of the storyline, and of that character, which is sort of the motor and within the vehicle of that character's drive. And then we have the dynamic character within the 5 story components, the 3 M's: misbehavior, manipulation, and motive. For main character misbehavior, dynamic manipulation, and opponent motive, those 3 M's are modifiers of those characters. Those characters are story components because they're decisions you make, but they're also component sources of material. They're the core part of how you brainstorm material and work out your story. So, but in the dynamic character, you have a dynamic relationship within, which is the vessel within the structure of the story, because we end up having not only an interpersonal dynamic between the main and dynamic character, but that becomes a dynamic relationship, which has a dynamic progression of conflict over the middle of the project, up the middle of the story. And at some point, because they've already met by page 30 in a feature, or the quarter point, that first segment, we sort of take that for granted, but that character represents a new mindset or is pushing the main character to a new mindset on the verge of something. And at the midpoint, there's some form of cooperation and further comprehension between the characters. And if it's not a love story and they're not in bed, they're still bedfellows, even if they're agreeing to disagree. But at that point, you're closer to the end of the story than you are to the beginning. And there's usually a complication in the story by sequence 7. And then at the low point, while the opponent activity has increased and the obstacles have been clarified and the mission and the stakes have been clarified, there's often an estrangement within that dynamic relationship, which pulls them apart even momentarily. And then we go into the third act, which is the convergence of everything that's been set up. You're not usually adding new material. You want to contain most of the adventure in the middle. And then the third act is about the character's understanding of what it is that they have to do, the amends they have to make. There's a rumination period leading to inspiration, leading to some preliminary accomplishment or achievement or task that has to be achieved in sequence 11, leading to the battle scene in sequence 12 as close to the end of the story as possible. And that leads to the battle scene where they're up against and facing off against the third party opponent. The dynamic character can often be there, but often they're off screen because they've been helped or they've been saved already. And then you have a resolution, a dynamic resolution within the battle scene or just after for a minute or two. And that's kind of an overview of structure. The 363 conveys that structure because every sequence statement is like a 10-page hash mark of a clock or the timeline of 120 minutes. And especially from 3 through 9, you have that dynamic progression where each event in the story, in that experience, along that certain kind of adventure within a genre, with an expectation for a certain kind of action and a second act verb that characters are involved in, like investigate or fall in love or, overcome an illness or rob a bank or pull off a scam or a caper, or propel a candidate, whatever it may be. Each event has an impact in the nature of the intimacy between the dynamic characters, often manipulated by or exacerbated by the opponent's motive with a path of obstacles. And then that relationship has a reaction to continue new action pertinent to the nature of that overall adventure and the experience that those characters are having. So ultimately, if you have a clear genre and a well-articulated dynamic progression, where you found the intersection between the intricacy of the story and the intimacy of that relationship between those stars, you have a movie. If there's some fresh source of entertainment or a conceit. So that leads to more seamless storytelling, which is what the United States has been known for. Our greatest export has probably been democracy to this point, and then our style of entertainment where things work out, where the American dream is illustrated. That's why in a premise line, we don't normally need to explain the ending. Of course, that's just because a premise line is a different level of expression than an actual scene statement where you express what happens in the end. We know based on the misbehavior in the circumstance that the story is usually going to work out well. That's where irony comes from, or how irony is contributed to. So that's just a quirk of premise line, because we're establishing arcs and components and sources of material and structure and highlighting how the story is going to work. So that's a good review. I'm sure I didn't mention every single exercise, but things like the 50/50s and 20/20s, and if you want to do 10/10s, the hierarchy of windows and all those different kinds of windows. The story separated scene outline just has a few idiosyncrasies, meaning all you're doing is you're keeping all of the scenes in each storyline separate for a while until you really test the structure and make sure that there's enough compression in those storylines. So is there anything anybody would like to review briefly? Gabriella, Lon?
I think you summed it up.
If you go through the checklist, not only the 15-part premise line checklist, which is very detailed, and probably sometime in January, February, I'll do a revision of the basic training workbook, adding about 6 or 8 pages that I've been working on. But if you remind me down the road, I'm happy to send it to you. I'm not guaranteeing when I'm going to get to it. But that 15-part premise line checklist always existed in some fashion. I just didn't make it a checklist until about 6 years ago.
I would love it if you at any time. Yeah.
Yeah, just feel free, like in 6 weeks, to ping me.
Okay.
Put it on your calendar.
Okay.
All right, so that's how much subtly we cover without necessarily everybody realizing how much we've covered. And mini script is a fallback position. It's not a requirement, but mini script meaning that you're just building the page when you get stuck. And if you're not getting stuck, if you want to go through in a week to 10 days and go through every sequence, like sequence 3 through 9 in 1 week and 10 back to 1, 2, and 3 in the second week, you're just building the page by throwing down a slug line, a setup line, and on the nose dialogue. And if you had 80 scenes in your outline and did a half a page per scene, that would be 40 pages to build from. Sometimes it ends up being a little bit of a holy mess, HOLEY. And so you do need to start those scenes over with greater vision and specificity. But it's a way to become less intimidated or daunted by needing to complete a volume of pages. Because remember, even though if you keep looking back at how many pages you've written, it's a little bit disheartening, because even if you didn't format something and then you translated it to format, you'd realize it's not that many pages, as you think. There still is blank space on every page. So even if you had as many as 60 lines, that's only 30 lines, and every line doesn't go completely across because dialogue is centered. So you could make the emotional argument that it doesn't take you that long to write these pages. Certainly, because 25 pages a week for 4 weeks is really only 12 and a half pages because of the blank space. That being said, the challenge of screenwriting is moments are representing your vision. You're not just writing prose directly to the reader. And so it's deceptively thinner or lighter or airy because of all the effort that goes into these moments and ideas representing what you're doing. Characters do things, and that has meaning. And they can speak to each other. And reading screenplays, and often and many of them, becomes revealing. And if you haven't read a ton of scripts, I recommend reading at least 2 a week for the year. That puts you at 100, and you'll be a different writer by the time you do that. And but be careful and you don't end up like me where you have to read everybody's bad screenplays because they're learning. Just read great material. And if you want to help a friend here or there, actually just send them to me. Questions or anything else?
Will you the expanded screen test? Will you?
Yeah, expanded scene test. It's just that there are so many more things you can ask a scene than the simple scene test, which is 2 questions. Does the scene advance the story? And is it entertaining? Because often you think you need it, but then if the answer to the second question is not yet, because it doesn't have set pieces, or I still have to finish it, or I still have to envision how it works, then that may negate the affirmative on the first question. But if you start to add other things, what's the scene conduct? How am I delivering this information? What do characters want? Is there misbehavior coming across from all characters? Is it consistent with the genre? Have I created the best level of suspense or thrills, or is it comedic enough? When you look at something like Animal House, if you haven't seen it, and that's just a coincidence, Ben, that I happen to give you that book. Every scene is fantastic. Every scene is an idea. And I don't, maybe I drop names occasionally, but I had a really great meeting at a party with Harold Ramis a few years before he passed away, unfortunately. And because we had a mutual friend, and I had interviewed not only Chris Miller, his co-writer, once or twice, but also we did a 30th anniversary panel. And he said, yeah, Jeff, people don't realize how many ideas you need to fill up one screenplay, which is essentially an idea as a container. I'm saying the word container. So your project is an idea that's executed a certain way. And then you need all these scene ideas, and they can be clever or subtly nuanced, if not clever. And then every moment is an idea within that scene. And that was one of the epiphanies I had when I think I was watching the sequel to Lethal Weapon. I was like, oh, the audience just laughed at that moment. But even when I was young and my parents took me to see Young Frankenstein, I think I may have mentioned, if I don't know if it was in this group, I was in the theater watching Marty Feldman looking at the brains and choosing Abby Normal, and I guessed that Abby Normal was abnormal. Like, I saw that coming as a young kid. And so the understanding of how these moments fit together, because yes, some writers are more character driven and write scene work that's excellent from a character perspective, and that suits their story and the kind of movie-going experience for the audience. Just like in a lot of TV, you mostly have like 2 shots the whole time, 2 people talking in a scene. They have an agenda. Maybe they don't get what they want. Sometimes it's more melodramatic and dramatic and over the top, and other times it's more interesting and inventive. Watch the movie My Dinner with Andre. It's just 2 people talking at dinner. It's not exceedingly well structured, but almost everything they're talking about applies today to our society and questions about art. And it was a movie that was very praised by Siskel and Ebert, 40 years ago. But it literally took me like 20 years to finally watch, because I just hadn't seen it in the theater at the time that it was hot. Wallace Shawn and I don't think it's Dick, I forgot the name of the other actor. So 2 people talking can be effective and affecting, but movies are more than two people talking, and movies are more than dialogue. And in the workbook, I discuss how it's the idea for the scene and the nature of the project that determines the degree of dialogue on the page. Don't default to dialogue. The first half hour of The Fugitive doesn't have that much dialogue. There is some. It works a different way, and you have the ability and the capacity to use various elements of the medium of filmmaking and storytelling in, film and TV. Okay, so let's look at Lon's 363. I thought it was clever, Lon, that you did like a header, but I would have done a few things differently. Just small touches. I would not have stacked your name and your date. I would have put that on one line across to save space. I wouldn't have necessarily put it on both pages, but it wasn't wrong that you thought to do that. The fact that you graded out was okay. And I would have cheated where I wouldn't have indented any of these numbers because your last one didn't indent. But what Word automatically does is if you add a space after the period, it indents it. So I cheat and I just don't put that space, and then it keeps it flush with the margin. You get what I'm saying? Those are very small things. What do you think your font is? 11 point?
No, it's Times Roman 12.
Okay, so I prefer Calibri, or I thought it was pronounced Calibri, but somebody did a hilarious thing that it's woke to that the Biden administration changed the font.
I heard that. Yes, I heard that.
Just hilarious moment.
It's actually, if I may, Jeff, I still work for the U.S. State Department, and we were given direction that you will change your font from that to Times New Roman.
That's because they're
Yes.
going in reverse. We're supposed
Yes.
to be, I think it's like 1952 right now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So, but the reason I changed from, we used to do 363s in Courier to, honor screenwriting. And then I was like, this is too light on the page. Then I went to Times New Roman. Then I went to Verdana. But then Arial used to be the type in Outlook as a default, and then it changed to Calibri. So I started doing everything in Calibri because I like that it's sans serif. Like it's easier to read. It's a little lighter, but this still looks good. Ben, can you read sequences 1 and 3 and Erica 6 and 9? And just by the way, can you just tell that it's come along so far? And even though I think some of these sequences, we'll see if there's room to streamline, that's not the most important thing to get the 363 on a single page. A page and a half is still better than most writers in Hollywood ever do. An entire movie or a story for a book on a single page or a page and a half, that's incredible. So we'll just take a general look at this. And Lon, don't overthink any notes because you're doing great, even just by the look of it. Great. Ben?
All right. In 1859, Sam Means is a successful businessman in Waterford, Virginia, a small hamlet in Loudoun County, and is married to Rachel, a leader amongst the small Quaker community there, and they enjoy an idyllic marriage steeped in love and trust with 3 young children to share life with.
Three.
Oh, you want me to go to 3 now?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. After the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, the majority of Loudouners sided with secession, with the exception of the Quakers, who are devout pacifists and abolitionists, which cause a rift between Rachel and Sam, one that Sam attempts to tamp down while publicly exhibiting a pro-secession demeanor so as not to raise suspicion amongst his neighbors. But when war is declared and preferences established, Lige senses something awry and suspects Sam might not be who he pretends to be.
Great, Erica, 6.
While Sam continues to scout successfully for the Union, he is called to Washington to meet with Secretary of War Stanton and asked to raise a company of Union scouts made up of Virginians, which he calls the Loudon Rangers, not only causing Rachel to question his morality, but also eliciting a 5K bounty on his head from Confederate leaders, a bounty Lige pledges to acquire.
And 9.
General Franz Sigel assumes command of the newly organized Department of West Virginia, and he orders the Loudon Rangers to be absorbed into the West Virginia 3rd Cavalry, an order that Sam disobeys after Rachel's persuasion and through a misunderstanding in Stanton's office. Sam is cashiered from the service for disobeying orders.
Okay, so first of all, Lon, once again, it's interesting. What stands out a little bit more for me now is just how cool the Quakers were in a way, right? As a sect, and to be able to stand tall in that regard. What was their perspective of abolitionism? And how much did they participate with the northern cities?
They were very active in the Underground Railroad, as a matter of fact. And there was one that actually went through Waterford. And Loudoun County is in Northern Virginia, but it's still in Virginia, which was a Confederate state. So for these Quakers to remain pro-Union was sort of a big deal, and it kind of pissed off everybody in Virginia. So that's
right. Well, that juxtaposition is interesting. Okay, so a general note is that you're still running behind and taking too long to get us into the adventure. Another general note, and I'll show you some examples of that. Another general note is that the sequences are still lacking enough direct interaction and encounter with other significant characters. What you're doing is you're making suggestions, but the character interaction isn't what's leading to the story progress. So first of all, I have a note right next to sequence 1. I said, okay, but. So you're establishing this like pastoral or bucolic kind of setting, but you're not getting on with, you're potentially showing us a few scenes, but it's not specific enough in lockstep with an event. It's not culminating in an event. So my suggestion, which was similar last time, is that probably sequence 2 and 1 can be compressed, which now makes 6, 5, etc. Everything comes down 1, which now means I still think you'll be running behind and running late and not getting the story going as readily. But the problem with all that is the second act adventure hasn't been, fully charted out, where you have a specific event and that affects the dynamic, and then the dynamic has a bond or a problem and something comes up, and then that creates a new event or a new inspiration for action. And so what I would do on a page or two is riff about the dynamic progression, and then apply some of what you can just list 7 or 8 or 9 stages of how that relationship works. Because while the good thing is in 9, when you say he's cashiered from the service for disobeying orders, that's fine. But you said he disobeys orders in the same sequence that he's then cashiered for that. I'm assuming that means, fired or, punished, whatever. So that can happen much earlier in the story, and what you're muting is Sam's process and what the experience is for him by having these things come a little late. And we always have to take license with true events, or, you know, elongate them or composite them as a way to tell a more effective story. In 6, while Sam continues to scout successfully for the Union, well, he's just continuing. Okay, so that's maybe not the greatest word choice. It's not a terrible placeholder at all. It has movement in it. But if that's sequence 4, that makes more sense. He's called to Washington, but because the problem is being called to Washington at the midpoint of the story feels like it's stopping the story rather than he's in the middle of a process. So I want to understand the stages of the adventure better, and the words are getting a little bit in the way. Another general comment is it's lacking Sam's emotion. And while you're narrating in a very effective way, his stance, maybe not experiencing his epiphanies and his choices, because when you say a character struggles, that's not very specific. That's a general way that doesn't contain specific action within it. Another example of how you're alluding to things without grounding them is at the very end of 3. Leach senses something is awry and suspects Sam might not be who he pretends to be. So it's almost like the end of that segment of 30 pages with a scene culminating at the end of it has a guy looking toward Sam without even interacting with anybody. And that's why it's really the end of sequence 2. But can you include what he actually does at the end of sequence 2? So it'll help you see these issues by compressing 2 into 1, and then everything comes down, and then what opens up and what are you missing? You get what I'm saying? Ask me any.
I do, absolutely. And some of these things that you've been talking about are things I've already been thinking about by going through the workbook, and
it's very difficult.
Basically incorporating more of the arc, the character arc, how he starts here and he ends here, and how he gets there. So
right, and let's
I've been thinking about all these things, not all these things you've been saying, but a lot of these things you've been saying.
Well, listen, you don't become a structure expert in 3 weeks, but that's what the 363 is teaching you, because when we evaluate a 363, we're helping you see the questions that can be asked. So if we go back to Erica's questions about an expanded scene test, just an expanded sequence test, the 7 core questions are, does it really have a beginning, middle, and end? Is it therefore a sequence with a kind of cause and effect rather than just a scene or two? What's the status of the main character misbehavior, and are they active in their own story? What's the dynamic manipulation, and are they interacting with some significant degree of connection and depth and intimacy? Where's the opponent, or who represents the opponent, and what's that activity, and how is that motive coming across? They're more, you see, the 7 questions are really like 20 questions, but when you get to the detail, sixth, but which is the 4th component, does it culminate with an event? And is there a genre, a kind of action, is the action consistent with the genre, and is there vocabulary and emotion connected with the genre? And that's different from a craft rewrite on a 363, where you just look at Sam every time and add emotion or add misbehavior. So it wouldn't, a quick pass, which will help you see other things, is just to add a phrase, how does Sam feel, even if it's wonky and awkward. So in 1859, Sam means, you don't have to say is a successful businessman in Waterford, Virginia. you could say, you could even take out small hamlet in Loudoun County. You could say in the small town of Waterford, Virginia. You know what I mean? You could just save words and is married to Rachel, but how are they interacting? The bottom line is, what's he feeling? What's she feeling? And that's why that's just like an introductory scene or two. That's not 10 minutes. But forcing emotion into it will help. And that's an advanced layer. That's a craft rewrite when you're still in component rewriting of the 363. See, the 363 evolved after many years to magically or naturally convey component rewriting and craft rewriting. When you move sequences around, let's say there's an existing script and the 363 represents the future of that script. When you move around sequences and add material, that's the equivalent of a component rewrite on the subsequent script underneath it. And if you go through and do an orbit for vocabulary or emotion or making sure that things are, how things happen is clear, not just that they happen. That's the equivalent of a craft rewrite on a whole orbit of a script. So the 363 contains those levels, even though you guys don't know that yet because you haven't done enough rewriting. So that's a helpful orbit, though, just as a fun thing to do. But let's just look at a sequence we didn't read, just to look at it for what's included and how it's working. Number 4, based upon his high standing in the community, Sam is asked by the Confederacy to raise a cavalry company to scout the Loudoun County area and protect the border between Virginia and Maryland. Now, what's good about that is that you're giving us a sense of what's what, but we might have already known some of that, and you might not have been that long-winded if it had already been established subtly in various points. But it's a fine opening sentence, but when you look at 10 pages of story, that's a lot of verbiage to, get that across, to which Rachel expresses complete dismay. That's fine. The phrase "to which" isn't ideal, but you might need it as a coupler. And while Sam continues to walk a very thin line, now you're using a cliche and an idiom instead of saying what he actually does. Even something like carries out a charade that he's still a secessionist, with so-and-so. Because who does that matter if he's not interacting? Because you said asked by the Confederacy, as opposed to asked by some person within the Confederacy. Then you say, and while Sam continues to walk a very thin line between his loyalty to his state, vice, his country, Liege watches him closely. Well, you could have just included Liege at the beginning, and later performs heroically during the Battle of Ball's Bluff, earning him a promotion in the Confederate Army. So that happens, but I don't know what Sam's experiences of that is, or what our experience of that is. So what you're doing is you're sort of dropping a few things in the vat, but you haven't created the recipe yet for how they're connected. And now, if that's sequence 3, it makes a little more sense, but we're still not getting to the start of the adventure. So Liege gets a promotion, but then what does that mean for Sam and how the adventure is going to start? So you're kind of burying the lead a bit in these sequences, but you can save. I'm not asking you to go in and edit every one of these right now because it's premature to do that. First, you want to compress and get the structure right, and then put some placeholders, even if the wording isn't great. Now, number 5, I'll just get into just because we have a few minutes. More to placate Rachel than any other reason. Well, you said more, so you don't need the phrase "any other reason." More to placate Rachel, Sam declines the Confederates' offer to raise. Well, we already know what the offer was, so you don't have to repeat the offer. More to placate Rachel, Sam declines the Confederates' offer to raise a cavalry company and secretly scouts for the Union Army, something he feels is right but privately laments. Okay, but we've already seen the lament. We've already seen his charade, so we don't have to explain that again. So I'm going to start it over. More to placate Rachel, Sam declines the Confederates' offer and secretly scouts for the Union Army. And the consequences becoming very real when Liege is ordered to seize Sam's house, mill, and livestock. So I haven't, everything you've described, I already knew in other sequences. You see what I mean? Like all you're doing is like having a guy mug for the camera. Oh, I don't know if I should do this. I don't know if I should do that. We already know what the issues are. Rachel, like you could even in the very first sequence, and as you combine 1 and 2, get across Rachel's point of view. So every time I see Rachel, I'm anticipating some judgment or comment, or I hate that guy. Get him out of our house. You know what I mean? But it's not poorly written. It's just and here's the other thing. One of the great things Lon is doing is he's carrying the theme, he's carrying the story, he's making us as the audience and the reader not forget what's at stake. It's just that he's slightly doing it in a way without showing, including action that displays it. But you're creating great stakes. But I think 1 through 5 is 1 through 3. And now that means that 6 is 4. And remember, the end is, if 6 were actually 6, the end would be 60. It would be 51 to 60. So you're looking at a bounty Liege pledges to acquire whatever. You know, that is probably page 40. I'm sorry. Yeah, page 40, which now means 7, 8, and 9, and maybe there's something in 10 because you're writing long, is really part of the second act, and you only have half a second act right now. These are normal things. This is why when writers submit their scripts around town after first drafts written linearly without these tools and without many tools, why they're prematurely submitted, because the entire second act hasn't been developed enough. But sometimes also what happens in these first drafts that are linearly written, you don't really know the story until you get to pages 80, 90, 100, 110, and all that stuff gets pulled back toward the middle with some placeholders pinned at those structural later stages of the story. This is a normal thing, Lon. You just need more stages of the adventure. You need more intricacies of how this political, socio, espionage, heroic,
Cultural.
yeah, how it's working.
Yeah.
Because where you have opportunity is for, you know, is, I mean, if I skip the 12, all you've done is given us an epilogue. That's not a battle scene. That's not a battle sequence. But when you say, I'm going to read 11, Sam's business finally fails as the community looks upon him as a traitor, and he is forced to declare bankruptcy and move with Rachel to Washington, where they open a boarding house to make ends meet, while Liege continues success in the private sector of Loudoun County and is celebrated as a local hero. That's fine, because basically you're looking at the Confederates won over his life, even though as Quakers they were doing the right thing, which in history proves to be the correct path. The problem there is you've just made the main character a loser. It doesn't mean it can't be ironic.
That's my point. Can it be ironic? Is he really a loser if
It depends on what he does.
Yeah.
So now you have 11 and 12 are just an epilogue, because you can show somebody at their own risk, do the right thing, and be heroic in that, even if they're ahead of their time. And somebody making a stand, I'll just say something personal. I don't even know why this came up. I'm still not married. I remember my first love, Katie, basically saying, I don't know why I'm going to therapy with you when you're not fighting to be with me, when she was the one that was pushing me, and I just said, I can't live my life by an ultimatum. I'm not ready to get married. Well, all right, that was at my risk, but I wasn't wrong. But what I'm saying is there can be heroism in a kind of interim defeat, even if history doesn't prove out. So what I'm saying is the character has to take a stand. What is that stand, even at his own disservice, and you just haven't worked that out yet. All you've given us in 11 and 12 is epilogue material. You haven't given us battle. And it can end poorly, but it can be ironic in a way where it's poor, but he's right, and we're rooting. And there is some saving face or saving grace because of belief, or the marriage works, you know what I mean? Or the union does laud him in some way. And I would work that out. How does somebody
at the very end, and so what really happened in true life, he dies in Washington, D.C. He's buried with literally a rock as a gravestone. Fast forward to 2021, he's recognized by the Sons of Union Veterans and is given an appropriate burial.
Well, that's probably an epilogue as well, but elevated to a certain level of, kind of like the end of A League of Their Own, where it's like it cuts to modern day, and you might consider some kind of a civil rights congressperson or some lineage of Sam with a short opening, as well. I'm not a huge fan of narration, but there can be, if the person narrating has a story of their own, it usually works. Bull Durham is a great narrator. Also, The Opposite of Sex with Christina Ricci. She's an unreliable narrator, where she's not just narrating what we see juxtaposed to what she does, that the narration is slightly off. So I'm not suggesting the narrator per se, but you can find a way for the epilogue to be more the postscript with visual content of Sam's recompense, or through history, a survivor of that reality in the modern day. You're not going to end Joan of Arc necessarily positively, but she's a hero. So you really have to work through that. But what you're missing is more stages of either espionage or the what he did and what the adventure is. But this is a normal thing, week 4 or 5 of working out an entire story that's worthy of a script. What's the adventure? What are the stages of the experience of the adventure? What are the increments of the adventure in terms of the ways and means, the math and science, the progress of the actual story? You need more events in the middle. And it's not just more. You need to go, how does this work? I would watch, not to emulate, but watch Dances with Wolves. He's a fake hero at the beginning because he really wants to kill himself, but because he ignites a victory they have to award him, even though they knew they don't like him, but they award him some post, an option, because he was heroic. And then he becomes part of a real tribe, and the inculcation into the native culture creates passion within him. Well, Sam doesn't start out to be a non-believer, but he wouldn't be with Rachel, and he wouldn't be a Quaker if he didn't share a lot of those abolitionist philosophies, even though they couldn't be shown. But even the coming out of his more vocal, like the idea, during Gabriella, I forgot if I mentioned this week 1 or so, but one of the lessons of the pandemic for me, of the hashtag Black Lives Matters movement, was, yeah, I'm not a racist. I know the civil rights movement. I don't know Jesse Jackson personally, but since the 60s, I knew who he was growing up. And my parents were very, liberal minded in that way. And, I've always felt that Jews and blacks should get along a lot better than they do. But on the front line. But what you realize is it's not enough to just not be a racist. You have to be proactively not racist. And that's what, for me, one of the lessons of Black Lives Matters, because you could have a character who believes all those things, but if they don't do anything and stand up for it, how is that illustrating what's right? Well, there's an analogy here to in a nuanced way that, Sam can potentially be more and more at risk because he has to be more and more on the front line. And that can be impressive in the love story and the connection between Sam and Rachel. And Rachel as a character could be more important than you're even realizing that she is in the second half of the story, and especially in the third act. Not to say that she isn't a woman of a certain station and is going to go beyond, but we have a lot of cliches in a good way about, homesteaders and, colonials and frontier people, right? And, life was tougher, we have it, we may be going through a lot of weird stuff, but we don't have to like make our own food, slaughter our own meat, So do you get what I'm saying about the opportunities to evaluate events in the 363 and in the outline?
Yes, I do.
You have to create a more complete but seamless experience. It's not complicated, but it's nuanced. What are the stages of what he has to achieve, and who are the players and the supporting characters in that process? So anyway, still a great job, especially for this early. I don't expect 363s to be this well developed. And it's harder to, it's easy to make some base comments about whether events are landing structurally. But remember, page 60, sequence 6, is closer to the end of the story. So we have to know nearly all the stakes. I mean, stakes become even further revealed in sequence 7 because the opponent activity is heating up, and the characters who have been dynamic characters who may be partially at odds to this stage still have, they're now more in further lockstep, and we haven't seen them to that point by then. But still, we're closer to the end of the story, so the audience has to know everything at, pretty much at work, if not at stake, by then. And so you're pretty much still working and operating from the beginning instead of the moving backwards to the middle. What's the battle? And so therefore, what has to be established, and what are the means of this process between these people? All right, any other comments? Gabriella, Ben, Any questions? Questions about the story, not for Lon to answer, but that help you understand the structure of things. Erica, anything? All right, so we missed Paul today, but I'll send an email later on just confirming the schedule. Let me know if there are any conflicts with that. Because we're only going to have 4 or 5 scenes, pages submitted, we have room to go over 1 or 2 more exercises. Because we'll still have, I mean, week 5 still goes 90 minutes, sometimes a little longer, depending on the number of people and the number of pages we're going over. And then I might send an additional exercise about scene work if I think we're going to have time. We don't need to see, Lon, a revision of this, but you might want to submit like sequence 6 or sequence 7, your scene list, as something to review, just for specificity's sake. Gabriella, if you did have your 363 revised, we could go over that next week. And
Okay.
Erica, no pressure, but if you did want to submit an A story or B story scene list, it's only helpful.
Yeah, I sent one this morning,
Okay.
like right before
Oh,
class.
good. I'll look at that and I'll send a quick round of notes. All right.
I already
Great to
have my own notes for it.
Great. Well, good to see everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. Again, Happy New Year. And
Happy New Year.
I'll probably put a mini camp on the schedule if this group wants to attend. It's primarily for pro members, but we do include a lot of basic training writers as well. So feel free to check in with any questions. Maybe confirm with Brad if you need office hours, when he's going to do them, or if he has them today. And we'll talk to you soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.